Hey guys, welcome back to Index In-Depth for Tau Empire. Part 2 is going to cover the key data sheets for the Tau Empire, whether you're playing them or playing into them, things you're really going to want to know for the faction. Um, First off, I guess we're going to start off with characters. So first is the Cold Star Commander. He's basically a big crisis suit. He doesn't really have any other stuff than that. He has the same weapons as they do, just as possible to hit with a few more wounds. But his ability is it gives crisis units that he joins movement 12, as well as assault on all their weapons. This is huge for the mobility of crisis units. It turns them from moving 10 per turn to moving 18 per turn because it unlocks their turbo boost crisis datasheet ability for crisis. Um, Also allows you to fire and fade 12 inches as opposed to 10, which can be quite big because it changes. So if someone's a rapid ingress within 9 of your crisis unit after you bring them down or move them forward, then you can move away 12 and make that 21-inch distance instead of 19. So it can be a big difference. Normally you're going to see the exemplar of the Cao Yon on him because that's just a huge damage multiplier for the crisis units. Um, Next up is the Cadra Fireblade. Massive rate of fire increase for breaches and strike teams. I think breaches actually probably become more point efficient if you add the points on for the Cadra Fireblade to them, as opposed to taking them without. His ability gives +1 shot on the breaches and strike team's guns, bringing them up to 30 for breaches and 30 in short range for strike teams. The other ability he has is he has Crack Shot, which gives him -3 AP on 6s to wound with his shots. Sort of interesting tricks to know for him is the +1 to shots applies for his own weapons. So his special pulse rifle, as well as any drones he has. That includes Crack Shot as well. So those drones are going to be 6 shots each, or 6 shots total for 2 of them if you had 2 gun drones. Reroll to wound 6s are AP3, so that's quite a nice little trick. For them, you will often see if there's any enhancements on them, it'll be probably pure time engram chip because the strats work quite well with breaches. If you're running a lot of breaches, you might want to run that. And then we've got the Firesight Marksman. So he's a really good backfield objective holder because he has stealth and lone operative. So he also has a marker light, so he's a really good spotter and some minor sniping abilities. There's nothing to write home about. But yeah, it's mainly the spotting and the objective holding you want to do because he can't really be killed by long range indirect. And if it's just like a 5-man unit that pops on and tries to shoot him, there's a good chance he can live with 4 wounds and stealth. So that's quite solid. Speaking of solid, we have Ornvar next, who is another lone operative, but he's got 9 wounds with a 4 pinball save, -1 to hit and -1 to wound. So he's really hard to kill. But he doesn't really do anything other than that. He just kind of sits there. He has a once per game 2+ invulnerable zone for 1 phase. So he can move forward and be annoying and not die for a phase. He doesn't have for the greater good though, so he can't spot. So there's a little bit less synergy there. And his leadership aura doesn't really, it's not very impactful. So it's more resilience but less utility on Ornvar. But you are likely to see him quite a lot, so that's why I've included him there. So next up is core units. These are not. I'm sort of listing these as units you're going to see in most lists. I think are going to sort of build the backbone of most Tau armies. First up is the crisis battle suits. So despite the change to vehicles and making them quite difficult to maneuver fly, if you still have a cold star battle suit, you can move fast enough that you can get to where you need to go. They have a really high damage output, probably the highest damage output per model or per unit that we have in the book, or pretty close to it. And then you can customize them for any situation. You want 3 flamers on them to deal with GSC, you can do that. If you want to go for the 666 ion blaster, that's one that most people do. I personally prefer triple plasma gun or plasma rifle. Yeah, you can. There's 100 different ways you can go with crisis suits, but their mobility with a cold star gives them a lot of ability to get to where they need to and apply damage where you need it, as well as scoring objectives at the same time with that movement. So you're going to see a lot of those. Next up is broadsides. these ones are definitely the biggest damage output in the book. With two shots, strength 12, AP4 damage, D6 plus 1, devastating wounds. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you get three of them together, all firing with double exploding sixes, all of a sudden if you only need a tiny spike of dice, and then suddenly you've got 10 hits, and you're deleting Terminator units just with sheer quantity of fire. Um, you can take I like to take them with weapon support systems, so they ignore hit penalties. So big guns never tire, they won't take, or they ignore stealth as well. So that's really useful. They can also come with seeker missiles, or plasma guns, or smart missile systems. Don't take the smart missile systems, just don't do it to yourself. Plasma or um, plasma or seekers are probably the way to go. They can also take missile drones, which are interesting because they're the only unnerfed version of the missile pod we have. They are still AP2, strength 7, AP2 damage 2. So they get a lot of shots that way, which will also ignore the hit modifiers if you take the weapon support system because they're counted as war gear. Yeah, really important for anti-tank, if you want to, if because that's something that we do generally struggle with. And they also have a kind of random 4+ pain against mortals, which just increases their resilience a little bit. Then lastly, we have the breacher teams. Two shots or three shots with a fire blade, a strength 6 AP1 damage 1, and they get full reroll to wound on an objective. They do have grenades as well, so you can use a grenade stratagem on them. And they hit on threes naturally, so they hit on twos with carry on, twos with for the greater good. It means they're great at just zooming forward in a devilfish, shooting the heck out of whatever is on that objective and taking it. Because they're infantry, they can go through walls, which is something that we don't have a lot of in the army because a lot of stuff is vehicles. So it's really good for getting stuff off objectives. Another neat trick you can do with breacher teams is because now when you come from reserves, you can disembark from a transport. You can bring a devilfish on 6 inches onto the board, get the breaches out 9, and then shoot 10 inches onto the board. Or you can use that to get within 6 rather than 9 of an enemy, and then get an easier charge if you need to do a desperate objective steal. So next up, we're on to the support and utility units. These are not really going to be your damage dealers, but probably things you're going to see a lot anyway, just for other utility that they bring. So the first up is the stealth battle suits. They're infantry with fly, movement 8. Otherwise, they're basically a space marine in terms of toughness, especially intercessor. Their ability is any unit that they are an observer for gains reroll ones to wound, which is super helpful, especially with all the high strength stuff that we have. You can whack a marker drone on there to give them advance and observe, as well as ignore cover when they observe, so really useful. They are stealth, so they're not super easy to kill. People do have to, you can't just fire some bolters at them and they'll die. They can also deep strike as well, so you can do good secondary work with them. Just a good general all-rounders. For only 75 points, you can't really say no to that. I've been taking three units in most of my lists recently. Next up is the Ghost Kill. Ghost Kill by far and away toughest unit in the index. We're looking at toughness 8, 2+ armor, stealth, and lone operative, as well as its stealth drone rule, which allows basically save your protocols for 9th edition, but free. So twice per game you can turn 2 successful wound rolls into 0 damage. So you do that before you roll a save. Super tough. I haven't found anything so far that's like any one unit that's been able to one round them. They've always been able to survive basically anything, whether it's the Space Marine melter dudes, the ones with 2 shots that reroll everything. I forget their name, or the graviton guns from Thunderkin. They just, even with anti-vehicle 2+, they just don't care. They'll just sit there and refuse to die for at least a round, sometimes 2. So fantastic, for holding the midfield is exactly what Town needed, really. And lastly is the Tetra. I'm not personally a fan of the Tetra, but you will see a lot of them out there. A lot of people using them. They give if they're an observer for a unit, they give that unit full rerolls to hit, which is it's pretty solid. They don't have any real weapons to speak of on their own, but they do have a marker light built in, so they do get ignore cover when they guide as well. And it is 80 points for two skimmers in a unit together, which are toughness 7 with 7 wounds and a 4 up armor save, which for the price that you pay is quite tough. Um, and they are a very small profile. They're a very small model, much smaller than you would think, based on the pictures you see online. So they're quite easy to hide. Um, so I reckon a lot of lists are going to have one or two units of these in there, only more as time goes by, as people get their hands on more and more of them. Um, but that's going to be the key units for Tau, ones to keep your eye out for. There are obviously others in there, but I can't cover everything in one video. So until next time, guys, thanks for watching.